Now, Blast is the second biggest and most meaningful circuit in CSGO. But actually, that doesn't even mean that it's the second set of important tournaments to win. Obviously, the most important, thanks to prestige, are the majors. But then we have what I call the prestige tournaments, which essentially are the two best ESL tournaments on their circuit, Katowice, Cologne, which even have tradition of being majors, and quite frankly, the format of them is just better than the majors right now, especially with the planes, especially with the double elim component. The stadiums are awesome, always guaranteed to have a good fan turnout. But after you go, the majors, the prestige tournaments, generally ESL circuit, highlighted by the Intel Grand Slam narrative, then you come to Blast Premier. And these are what's called the partner leagues, right? Blast Premier, ESL/IEM circuit. But the problem is the Blast circuit is broken in seemingly all regards. Like, if you look at what I assume must be the aims and ideals of Blast, knowing some of the people over the years, working with them at different stages, whether they were Blast.Pro series, whether they were Blast Premier, seeing them from the outside, seeing what they say in interviews, right? First and foremost, the number one goal has to be share revenue with the partner teams. In doing so, give them exposure as well, hence the buy-in being worth it. Then you have make competitive fields, aka good tournaments, from which you get great narratives, storylines are derived because you have the right teams playing against each other, they produce epic matches, the status is there, the pressure is there, the big arena events are there, so the champion, when they win, they're really hailed in the way that Team Liquid was when they won that Grand Slam at ESL Cologne, or back when Katowice was a major. Obviously Astralis won their second of the titles back-to-back as a major with that particular five-man lineup. Obviously, you want to establish a prestige level event. Hopefully, your capper for the event, your big flagship event that really matters historically. Like I say, after the majors, people want to win Katowice. They want to win Cologne. Do people really care about Blast Global Finals? Do they care about the seasonal finals? I wouldn't say they do to the same degree. And I think if you go and look, there's a reason why the winners of those events aren't the greatest teams of all time. They tend to actually be the sort of second, third or fourth best teams. Other teams like Heroic who just traditionally don't win the big events because there's not as much pressure. It doesn't matter as much, these events. People aren't actually prepping for them and trying to peak in the same way as they are for the major, for Cologne, for Katowice, where there are no excuses. So to me, I will say first and foremost, one area I have to give props to Blast is they did paint themselves into a corner when they began as a tournament circuit. When they began as Blast Pro Series in 2017, late 2017 through to 2019, their format was fucking stupid. They had those silly best of one tournaments with also a small group of teams invited, where you could even end in a draw and there was no OT because it was a little best round robin. And you had just one final, which was just a best of three. Right, minus that is that they won in LA in 2019 where the top four made the playoffs and the best of threes, and obviously the global finals at the end of 2019 was a double elim, all best of three tournament. But aside from that, the Blast Pro Series, there's a reason I called them Blast of Ones. There's a reason why when Astralis just kept skipping events in 2019 and going there and skipping like ESL New York in 2018, I'll call them Blastralis eventually. Like, they just looked like they didn't care about competing at the biggest tournaments because, if you don't know, Refresh, the company that owns Astralis, also owned Blast Pro Series at the time, at exactly the same time, in a massive conflict of interest. So in my opinion, they moved then to the Blast Premier system. Sadly, immediately the online era came after the spring group, so we never got to see what a finals would have looked like back then in 2020. So okay, in the online era, a lot of tournaments were scoffed, and quite frankly, Blast was all right. It was as good as any other tournament because they were all online. There was no LANs. The problem is, since we came back to LAN, they have not been able to upgrade and meaningfully recreate their format and their circuit to be good enough. And quite frankly, ESL just puts them to shame. You can complain all you like about the studio LANs of like Pro League, it doesn't matter. Katowice and Cologne by themselves bury Blast Pro Series and make Blast look like absolute fools. There is nothing comparable to the Intel Grand Slam as an accomplishment to win over Blast. They haven't even created a concept for what would happen if you win the spring and the fall finals and the world final. They haven't even got those ideas. Now look, ESL didn't invent those. A lot of those concepts come from things like Korean StarCraft, where they had the golden mouse and the golden badge for winning 3 of the titles respectively within the different, you call them Star Leagues colloquial, but technically only the OSL's a Star League, right? We don't even have anything like that for Blast. They don't get this themselves. They still think it's just about the fans in the arena and the show. They don't get that there's millions watching online. Well, maybe sometimes there isn't for their tournaments. They don't get the premise of what esports can be in Counter-Strike. So first and foremost, I think they've failed narratively. If you look at the group stages, the problem is, first of all, group stages often tend to be the first tournament on the calendar after the player break. Now, I don't know if it's ESL convinced them to do this or if they asked for this, but if it's ESL, man, did they finesse these guys. Because it might sound awesome. Oh, big player break. Then everyone's going to be so hyped to watch the games. They're all going to tune in. But it makes the games narratively trash because teams haven't got any land form under their belts. They're coming in fresh from the player break. And then you play through the groups and you're like, right, let's see who goes on in the next stage in the fight. Oh, wait, the finals is months from now. And in the meantime, we're going to have other tournaments and sometimes even majors before we get to the finals. That just ruins the narrative completely. It doesn't work. Like, what it means is when you have upsets and underdogs make it through, like Complexity and OG, I know Complexity, I think, made it there because Navi wasn't at 10 or whatever. When you have these underdogs make it there, it doesn't matter. Because when they make it there, or big or something like that, before they were a part of the team, in that scenario, by the time the finals rolls around, well, because they were underdogs, they don't have the same form anymore, so they can't continue that and see what they would have done, like at Cologne. Think of what happened at the last Cologne, where you had the runs of Mouse, and you had Astralis getting and Movistar Riders. That was all one tournament. That's why they were able to build their legend, as it were, at the time, and look like, oh, wow, are these teams going to break through? They didn't, but okay. You don't get that. And in fact, not only have you cooled off the underdogs, but when you come to the spring finals or the fall finals, and it's months since the groups, you look at the lineup and you're like, nah, that's a bomber. Yeah, where are all the top teams that have been winning the big tournaments? Where are the ones I'd want to see in this? Whatever. Just whatever, innit? And you don't care about those teams. It makes them fodder. Now, I get that, like, oh, yeah, obviously, you've got this scenario where, like, technically, if you could count the tournaments, like the finals was connected to the groups, it is almost like a Katowice or a Cologne. At least you'd have a lot of teams entering. You have the showdown element bringing teams in sometimes that are good, but it just doesn't narratively hang together because how spread out it is, how sparse it is, and how some of it's online, there's some of it's LAN, but initially you can't get a disqualified. There's so much about it, not disqualify, you don't fail to qualify. It's just, so much about it just doesn't work narratively. People just can't tell the story in the right way. And also, the groups playoffs format where you do the groups where it's like, now at least if you win the group, you just go through straight away. That's at least decent. But then the other three teams go into those like playoffs. And because you get all these occasional upsets, I'll actually talk about why in a second, in the first matches, when you sort of reseed those extra playoffs, nearly every single time, one of them's super easy, one of them's medium, and one of them's insanely hard. One of them will be like 3 or 4 of the best teams in the world. Now you can say, yeah, but just win the games, bro. Just win the games. No, the point is when you have bad formats that are done in this way that lead to silly concepts of seeding, it means that you're actually going to get scenarios where tiny flukes mean the best teams in the world knock each other out. And that is not actually what seemingly anyone wants. Viewers don't want it. They don't tune in for games when lesser teams are playing. So to me, the big problem you also have is the initial group, the seeding one, and now qualifies you through. Also, because it's the first tournament after the player break, that is the most rife game to be a massive upset. Wasn't there the one last year where Navi got beaten by OG in the opener? Then there was the one where Heroic was beaten by Evil Genius, dog shit Evil Geniuses this year in the first game, right after the playoff, when Heroic was the number 1 team in the world, and at the time would always handle underdogs. That's because it's the first game, you already know weeks in advance who you're playing, so you can prep for them, you can anti-strat them. Now, I like those aspects, but not if it then has a knock-on to making a terrible bracket. Like, fine, let them win the game. But this is the problem. It spoils the rest of the brackets. You always get 1 or 2 top 10, top 12 type teams knocked out in that silly playoff part, where you're like, oh, what's going on here? Now, the finals itself, because of the spot where it's disconnected from the groups, doesn't feel like an event like the groups get so many months later. And so as a result, because of the disconnect from the group stage, it makes them just 8-team lands. That's all they are. So it's nothing like a Cologne. It's nothing like a Katowice. It doesn't have that same feel. So to me, just like it, in terms of the group format and the playoff setup, it can't be compared to the prestige events of ESL. Like, they have that planes into the group with double a limb, into, top 6 as well in the stadium. But by that point in time, you're hyped. People have warmed up. They've gotten going. The fans are ready. Everyone's ready for the top teams. You go into the stadium. You're in Katowice, the Spordeck. You're in the Lanxess in Cologne. These are classic arenas for Counter-Strike. It's a big deal to play in those ones. It's a big deal to win in that scenario. If you can get over the hump there, you might actually make it as an elite pro and go down in history. Who really cares about the blasts? Like, shout out Kassad. They are banana cups. playoffs, even when they're in stadiums. Like, the only one is the Royal Arena, and that's mainly just, obviously, if there's Danish players playing there. They just haven't lived up to the vibe, all in all. Then there is also the rampant cheating, which is a classic problem in a lot of Counter-Strike tournaments. But Blast just don't even seem to care about turning off the X-ray in the arena. They don't even seem to care about prepping the crowd. When I worked at E-League, they would actually take the crowd and explain to them before we went live, before you saw the show come on TV, that like, look, we understand you want to cheer for people. Yeah, do that during the games, but please don't shout out information. Try not to give away like things that happen in the game, or we'll have to throw you out because actually you're ruining the environment. Essentially, what they do in tennis if you just start shouting when someone's serving or doing something silly to distract the players. So to me, ESL does run the best events in CSGO esports. And I think you saw that with the Blast Paris Major, when they got to have to run a giant stadium event and they had 8 teams just for the playoffs and they had all these groups before the tournament areas, and you heard about some of those silly stories with all the group stage games and maybe a TV over here in the background that's technically showing the game for a few rounds that you could maybe see out the corner of your eye. Man alive. They just showed me they don't have the chops to run big stadium events the same way ESL does, because ESL has decades of experience doing giant events like that. Blast has just been running these little, what I think with Blast.Pro series, it was even like 6 teams, and then now these are 8-team lands. Like, this just doesn't cut it, I'm afraid. This isn't good enough. It's not at the level of ESL. And then we're on some old school shit that everyone complained about when ESL used to do it, even the talent. But everyone's just fine because they all think, yeah, fuck ESL, so Blast must be good since Blast is the one that is a rival of ESL. No, maybe they both have fucking problems. Maybe ESL's good at one thing, they're just douchebags in some other area. Well, one of the biggest problems with Blast is, I feel like I'm in fucking 2015 again. Why are we having, at your big finals, you only have 2 of them, and then go into the world finals, we have 4 best of 3s in one day, right? That means there is almost no normal human, as in who lives a life outside of just watching a sport or esport that day, who can watch all the games. If someone's not in the perfect time zone, they can't watch all the series as a result. There's matches for European viewers ended at 6 a.m. local time. This just doesn't make sense. And look, I know this isn't how esports is prepped. Like, you're not supposed to necessarily watch all the games, but that has been the way that people are used to. But bigger for me is, as a result as well, it means that depending on wins or losses, you're going to be all over the place with the teams. That you can be playing the later game, but then because on the next day you won or lost, now you might have to play the first game. So you have the shortest prep time and time to sleep a lot in between, and someone else has an enormous one, sometimes just by fluke of the fact that their game was first before that they also lost, but then they're going to play later. It doesn't make sense. It's unfair to some degree. So I don't know why they can't just add a few more days or find cheaper venues and just have 2 best of 3s a day and really put in the effort and go around them. And also, you got to figure out, like, I personally think you should always have the set schedule. You should never do the accelerated schedule, because you want this to be like a sport where if I'm only a fan of FaZe Clan and I want to see FaZe Clan play against Heroic, it's never a case of like, oh, it said it was a schedule start at 8 p.m. What? I tuned in now at 8 p.m. We're on the end of map 2. They're about to lose. Like, if that happens, viewership just can't survive, in my opinion. You've got to have the content between, you've got to have ways of filling it in, and you've also got to allow yourself space for the epic best of 3s that go too long. Then there's the whole partner system, which is the main thing everyone's been complaining about. The problem is, I'll tell you right now, as someone who worked with Flashpoint and who knows what's going on in the LCS and League of Legends, these big American orgs, especially the American orgs, will leave the game CSGO if they don't have a proper partner system that shares rev with them, that gives them guaranteed exposure. Now, it's all well and good being an idiot pleb who pivots to nihilism, like, well, then just let them leave then, let someone else replace them. The other people who replace them won't be like Hence and really, really awesome. They'll actually be some bum org that just buys in min-max, like an Envious did in Flashpoint. Don't put in good lineups, just get the exposure, and it just means you'll have even worse competition. You need to have the big orgs in this game. If you don't, I'm telling you, they will put their money into Valorant, into League of Legends. They previously did it with Overwatch. They'll put their money into Rocket League, Rainbow Six. These are the games where they get the revenue, where they have the better deals with the publishers, where they get basically more incentive to invest their money. It doesn't matter that they might love Counter-Strike. Unless they're a Jason Lake character, that's not going to be enough to stick in the game. So doing a silly thing like, well, just leave them, just make our money. Like, That is what an imbecile says, and anyone who addresses this topic that way should be immediately ignored. You are a cretin who doesn't know what they're talking about and knows nothing about finances. So I can tell you from the PEA at the end of 2016 to the Flashpoint story, these orgs need revenue, but they also in the short term want it all just set up for them. They don't want to do any work for it. That's why the Flashpoint angle didn't work. That's why the players voted against PEA. They never understood they could have made so many millions of dollars extra if that had actually succeeded with massive team orgs selling their sponsorships in America. That's why we had the Louvre agreement. That's why Blast have this partner system. Now, look, I think they're a silly secondary option, but it's at least a way to make some guaranteed revenue. If people don't know, Heroic, when they were one of the best teams in the world, wasn't even in Blast. They bought MIBR's slot, and I heard for big bucks, a lot more than you'd think, so that they could be in it, and they could be guaranteed to be in it. And obviously for them, stuff like Fall Finals, Royal Arena in Denmark, that's a big deal. And this is something that they did once the org got their investment. So one of the key things about the partner system, it is key, is to give the bigger orgs guaranteed exposure. That means they can justify staying in the game and spending millions on these player salaries. Now, one of the big problems you've had in Blast has been when you have orgs that business-wise might make sense, or in other games they're massive, like in Dota 2 and Valorant, Evil Genius is a pretty big org. But in CSGO, they've been a fucking joke forever, but they're in the Blast partner system. Complexity is a legacy org, and in the online era, they had a banging team. They've been pretty crap with that NA team the last few years. Big, look, they sometimes are a spicy dark horse team. They're not even that giant an org, but you look at it like, is that really who you'd want to be one of the 12 teams every single time starting out in the groups? No, but if the org gets in and they get the slot, what are you going to do? Astralis used to be the greatest team of all time. They had the conflict of interest. It's obvious as to why they'd be part of this system. They've just had stupid lineups for the last couple of years, right? They haven't been relevant when they're in these groups. You never see them at the fucking Fall Finals, minus that one time they had Config and Blame F and they went fucking crazy and we were just coming back to Lance, right? They're just not a relevant team. I mean, they're starting to become now, but even then they haven't quite made the hump, have they? Then you have, obviously, NIP, mixed bag themselves. Sometimes they have solid lineups. Sometimes they don't. Been years since they had a true contender, and that was mainly in the online era. OG's just whatever, because that Dota 2 org just doesn't get it. They don't get that they were essentially like a startup that was able to survive by the fact that people like Nortail and Fly, legends of the game, were willing to play, potentially for cheaper, and then get fuckers like Miracle, insanely talented to play, because they wanted to play with people like Fly and with Nortail. Like in the CSGO, they don't have any of that. They don't have some like franchise player. They don't have someone willing to play for less who's some world talent. So as a result, OG always just has whatever lineups, and then they're always part of Blast as well. Like, who cares? Yeah, they're a good upset team. But if you had a choice between having like Virtus.Pro, ENCE or Cloud9, would you choose OG over them? Now look, you don't have a choice yourself because you're just a fan. I am as well. This is about business. And so for business, it makes sense for these teams to be here. There's a reason why the other orgs don't buy their slot. But it means that I've just gone through there. Astralis, Big, Complexity, EG, NIP, OG. That's 6 teams. There are only 12 partner teams. Now, the other 6 are bangers. Yeah, they're some of the absolute best in the world. We got lucky with those. But this is an example of when it can be its absolute worst. And the problem is, how do you get teams who aren't partner teams but are really good into your circuit? Well, they have to come through that fucking showdown, don't they? Or if you win the major, you can just go to the Blast World Finals. That in itself is so silly, by the way, because since Vitality won the major, they didn't even have to win this spring finals and they're guaranteed to beat Blast World. I get that you want it at Blast World Finals, but the idea you make it, it's not that big a deal to win this seasonal finals. There's something off with that. You've got to have an extra. That's why I say make a narrative. Make a thing if you win all 3, you get like $500,000 extra and a fucking ring each or some shit. Whatever it is, make something to incentivize them. Because when I say about getting these teams in, because you have to play in this crazy showdown, which is online qualifiers into, even the showdown itself is online. Well, and even now, by the way, is split. So now America's team makes it no matter what, which tends to be a crap fodder team as a result now. I think, first of all, the showdown itself, once you get to like the last portion, it should be both regions combined in a LAN and then just have the best whatever teams, 2 teams come out of that and go into the finals. That would be cool. That would be something to watch. That would be as good as an ESL Challenger type tier 2 event as the odd really big team like a Virtus.Pro there. Yeah, I could live with that. I could watch that. But the problem is, even the online thing, you have to win all through these crazy online qualifiers where there's loads of randoms can beat you who themselves won't qualify for the finals. Then when you get to the online thing, you have to win, what, like 3 best-of-3s or something to make it there because of this silly format. It just means that like some of the best teams in the world can't lose one match, right? Except for the greatest teams of all time, the top 10 teams ever, when they're on their most insane form, even great teams lose the odd match here and there. That's why most formats allow like 2 or 3 lives, you'll notice. Well, in this scenario, you don't get one in that. So as a result, you're not getting the best teams usually coming through the Showdown. There actually are some all-time great teams, some teams that won other events that just can't get through because they put one foot wrong and they ain't there. Meanwhile, yes, you have to reward the partner teams because it's part of why they've bought in, but they're getting 1 million lives and they're all on LAN. Except obviously that some of them go into this Showdown here, which gives them another life to potentially qualify through. So to me, it's too skewed towards the partner teams. Give them the exposure, but don't skew it too much. Maybe even let some qualifiers into the partner part of the thing. Just to be like, look, it's so hard just like the Showdown to get in through that you wouldn't choose to do that. You'll still choose to be a partner. You can give people the exposure and make it competitive. Because if you look at some of the teams now, look, Cloud9's core has been one of those relevant teams the last couple of years. ENCE has been insanely overperforming for years now and always relevant. They just won a big LAN. They're not involved. Virtus.Pro, winners of the major. Solid Dark Horse team. They're not there. Fury aren't in the best form now, but they were always a great team. They brought loads of viewership. Fnatic has been as good as a NIP has for years. They just don't have the slot and they didn't buy in initially. Mouse isn't as relevant now, even though they just did have that one cheeky little run. But once upon a time, they were enormous. They also didn't get the partner slot for whatever reason. Presumably the money wasn't as much back then. Them and Fnatic have always had slightly financials compared to maybe people like Complex, Evil Geniuses, and IP. So to me, the problem is we've already seen how this ruins things. When Gambit and Heroic were the 2 best teams in the world in the online era, they had to go through the Showdown because they're not partner teams. The 2 best teams in the world. And you know what? Yeah, maybe Gambit could get there. Maybe Heroic could sometimes get there. But it's so fraught that even they might not. That's how ridiculous it is. So to me, this just doesn't work. Like, Blast is just a banana cup. People just don't care about it because across the board on the circuit, it's failing all the objectives or it's not living up to what ESL does. Now, I don't want Blast to go away. I still want us to have a big circuit. Lord forbid we had to go to some of those smaller tier 3 events instead of it. But it could just be reformulated to be so much better.
It's YNK, so since I stole all of Thorin's gigs, at the very least, what you guys can do is subscribe to his YouTube channel, so go on and do it right now.
As Mary J. Blige said in her track, All I Need, you're all I need to get by, which is the case for me and my Patreon community who support this channel and these videos. Some of them include Theogony, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Joseph Adcock, Tosh, Bot Pounder 420, Thooorin, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Goh, Yurka, and a special thanks always to the main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask a question in my regular video AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who upcoming guests are. Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content, or you want to take part in one of those longer esports discussions with me where we go all over the place. Well, if any of those grab your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Risk Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.